Welcome to the story of the ant and the grasshopper. This is a tale about hard work, preparation, and friendship. It's perfect for learning English with simple sentences and an important message. The ant and the grasshopper. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our video on the ant and the grasshopper story. Today, we will learn about two characters, the ant and the grasshopper. This story teaches us an important lesson about work and play. This story shows us that it's important to work hard, plan for the future, and also be kind and helpful to others. So, are you ready to learn the full story of the ant and the grasshopper? Let's watch together. Chapter 1. The Busy Ants. It was a sunny day in a vibrant meadow. The sky was clear and blue, and colorful flowers covered the ground. Tall trees swayed gently in the breeze. Birds sang cheerful songs, and bees buzzed around the blossoms. In the middle of the meadow stood a large anthill. It was the home of many ants. These ants were known for their hard work and teamwork. Every day, they worked together to build their home and gather food. Among the ants was Antonia. She was a diligent and responsible ant. She was small but very strong and clever. Antonia led her friends and made sure everyone worked together. "Let's keep working hard," said Antonia. "We need to prepare for winter." The ants nodded and got to work. Some ants carried leaves and seeds. Others dug tunnels in the anthill to store food. Everyone had a job to do, and they worked happily. Antonia walked around, checking on her friends. She saw one ant struggling to carry a large piece of fruit. "Do you need help?" she asked. "Yes, please," said the ant. Antonia quickly helped, and together they carried the fruit to the storage area. As the sun shone brightly, the ants continued their work. They knew that winter would come soon, and they needed to gather as much food as possible. That evening, the ants sat together outside the anthill. Antonia spoke to her friends. "Winter is not far away. We must be ready. Let's keep gathering food and building our home." The ants agreed. They understood how important it was to prepare. They worked as a team, and they trusted Antonia's leadership. The meadow was peaceful, but the ants were busy. They knew that their hard work today would keep them safe and comfortable in the future. Antonia looked up at the sky. "We may be small," she thought, "but together we are strong." The ants continued their work with determination and joy. They were proud of their teamwork and knew they could face any challenge if they stayed united. Chapter 2. The Carefree Grasshopper. In the same sunny meadow where the ants worked tirelessly, lived a cheerful grasshopper named Greg. Greg loved to sing and dance. He hopped from flower to flower, playing his tiny violin. The meadow echoed with his joyful songs, and he seemed to have no care in the world. Greg was different from the ants. While they worked hard every day, Greg spent his time enjoying the warm sun and the soft breeze. He never worried about gathering food or preparing for the future. One morning, Greg was playing his violin under a tree. He saw Antonia and her friends carrying seeds and berries to their anthill. Greg chuckled and hopped closer to them. "Why are you working so hard on such a beautiful day?" he asked, strumming his violin. Antonia paused and looked at Greg. "We are preparing for winter," she said. "When the snow comes, there will be no food in the meadow. We need to collect as much as we can now." Greg laughed. "Winter? That's so far away. Why not enjoy the sunshine while it lasts?" he said, doing a little dance. Antonia frowned. "Greg, life isn't just about today. If we don't prepare, we'll be hungry and cold when winter arrives." But Greg wasn't convinced. He smiled and said, "There's plenty of time for that later. Right now, I want to sing and dance." "You should try it sometime, Antonia. It's much more fun than carrying seeds." Antonia sighed. "Fun is important, Greg, but so is being ready for the future. I hope you'll think about it." Greg waved his hand dismissively. "Don't worry about me, Antonia. I'll be fine. There's always food in the meadow." With that, Greg hopped away, playing a cheerful tune on his violin. The ants watched him go and shook their heads. "He doesn't understand," one of them said. Antonia replied, "We can't change his mind, but we can keep working hard. When winter comes, we'll be ready." While the ants continued their work, Greg danced and played in the meadow. He loved the warm days and cool nights. The thought of winter never crossed his mind. As the days went by, the ants' anthill filled with food. Antonia felt proud of her team and their efforts. Greg, however, kept laughing at them, saying, "Why work when the meadow is so full of food?" Antonia hoped Greg would understand her words before it was too late. She knew the seasons would change, and the meadow would not always be so kind. For now, Greg played on, carefree and happy, while the ants prepared for the challenges ahead. Chapter 3: The Changing Seasons. Autumn arrived in the meadow, painting the trees in bright shades of red, orange, and yellow. The cool breeze carried fallen leaves across the ground, creating a soft carpet. The once green meadow looked magical under the golden sunlight. The ants kept working, knowing they had little time left before winter. Antonia led her team, gathering seeds, berries, and grains. They stored everything carefully in their anthill, ensuring they would have enough to last through the cold months. Greg, the carefree grasshopper, continued to sing and play. The cooler air didn't bother him. He hopped from tree to tree, marveling at the colors of the leaves. "What a beautiful season," he said, strumming his tiny violin. One day, as Greg was playing near the anthill, he saw the ants carrying heavy loads of food. He laughed and called out, "Why are you still working so hard? The sun is shining, and there's plenty of food everywhere." Antonia stopped and looked at Greg. "The sun is shining now, but it won't last forever. Winter is coming, Greg. Soon the meadow will be covered in snow, and there will be no food." Greg waved his hand dismissively. "Winter is still far away, Antonia. I have plenty of time to gather food. Why don't you relax and enjoy this lovely day?" Antonia sighed. "Greg, every day counts. The seasons are changing. The leaves are falling, and soon the grass will wither. When winter arrives, you'll need food to survive." But Greg didn't listen. "You worry too much, Antonia," he said with a grin. "There's always something to eat in the meadow." Antonia shook her head and returned to her work. She and the other ants continued to gather and store food. They worked from sunrise to sunset, knowing that time was running out. Greg, meanwhile, spent his days enjoying the warm sun. He played his violin under the trees, danced in the falling leaves, and nibbled on the grass. He felt no urgency and thought the ants were worrying for no reason. As the days grew shorter and the air grew colder, the meadow began to change. The grass turned brown and the flowers faded. The once abundant food started to disappear. One chilly morning, Greg noticed that the meadow looked emptier. "Where are all the flowers?" he wondered aloud. He hopped to his favorite spot, only to find the grass dry and the seeds gone. That afternoon, Greg saw the ants working as usual. He called out to Antonia, "Why are the flowers gone? Where can I find food now?" Antonia looked at him with concern. "Greg, the meadow is preparing for winter. The plants are dying, and soon, everything will be covered in snow. You should have gathered food when you had the chance." Greg laughed nervously. "I'll be fine. I'm sure I can find food when I need it." But deep down, he started to feel unsure. As autumn continued, the meadow grew colder and quieter. The ants stayed busy, filling their anthill with food and securing it for the months ahead. Antonia felt proud of her team's hard work, but worried about Greg. Greg, on the other hand, began to notice how hard it was to find food. He searched the meadow, but most of the seeds and berries were gone. "Maybe I should have listened to Antonia," he thought. Still, Greg tried to stay cheerful. "Winter can't be that bad," he said to himself. "I'll find something to eat." But as the days grew colder, Greg realized that the carefree days of summer and autumn were truly over. The meadow was changing, and he wasn't prepared. The ants, safe in their anthill, watched as Greg continued to hop around the meadow. Antonia felt sad for him and hoped he would find a way to survive the coming winter. For Greg, the lesson of preparation was becoming clearer with each passing day. The warmth of the sun was fading, and the reality of winter was beginning to set in. Chapter 4: The First Signs of Winter. The cold winds of winter blew across the meadow. The trees were bare, and the ground was hard with frost. Small flakes of snow began to fall, covering the meadow in a white blanket. Inside their cozy anthill, the ants were warm and safe. They had plenty of food stored for the long winter months. Antonia sat with her fellow ants, proud of their hard work and preparation. Meanwhile, Greg, the grasshopper, woke up feeling chilly. He looked outside and saw snow everywhere. Where did the green grass go? He wondered. The meadow was silent and empty, with no flowers or seeds in sight. Greg hopped around, searching for food. He scratched at the snow, hoping to find something to eat. But the snow covered everything. "There's nothing here," Greg said, feeling worried. As the day grew colder, Greg shivered. He realized that winter had truly arrived, and he was not prepared. "If only I had listened to Antonia," he thought. "I should have gathered food like the ants did." Hungry and cold, Greg remembered the warm anthill where the ants lived. "Maybe Antonia will help me," he thought. He felt embarrassed but decided to ask for their kindness. Greg made his way to the anthill, his legs sinking into the snow. When he reached the entrance, he hesitated. "Will they even want to see me?" he wondered. Summoning his courage, Greg knocked on the tiny door. Inside the anthill, Antonia heard the knock and went to see who it was. She opened the door and saw Greg, shivering in the cold. His cheerful smile was gone, replaced by a look of regret. "Greg, what are you doing out in the snow?" Antonia asked, surprised. "I'm so cold and hungry," Greg admitted. "I didn't prepare for winter, and now I have nothing to eat." "Please, Antonia, can you help me?" Antonia looked at Greg with sympathy. She remembered how he had laughed at the ants' hard work, but she also saw how sorry he was. "Come inside, Greg," Antonia said kindly. "You can warm up here." Greg stepped into the anthill and felt the warmth surround him. He saw piles of food neatly stored and the ants working together to keep their home comfortable. "You were right, Antonia," Greg said. "I should have prepared for winter like you did. I didn't listen, and now I'm paying the price." Antonia nodded. "We tried to warn you, Greg, but I'm glad you understand now." The other ants gathered around, curious about their visitor. Antonia explained Greg's situation, and the ants whispered among themselves. After a moment, Antonia said, "Greg, we will share some of our food with you. But next year, you must work to prepare for winter." Greg's eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Antonia. I promise I'll learn from this. Next year, I'll work as hard as you do." Antonia smiled. "It's never too late to change, Greg. Let's make sure you get through this winter." Greg sat with the ants, sharing their food and warmth. For the first time, he truly understood the value of hard work and preparation. Chapter 5: A Lesson Learned. The cold wind howled outside the anthill as Greg the Grasshopper stood at the door. Snowflakes clung to his green body, and he shivered from the icy air. When Antonia opened the door, she saw Greg trembling. His cheerful smile was gone, replaced by a look of worry and regret. "Greg, what are you doing here?" Antonia asked, surprised. "I'm cold, and I have nothing to eat," Greg admitted. "I didn't prepare for winter, and now I don't know what to do. Please, Antonia, can you help me?" Antonia looked at Greg carefully. She felt sympathy for him, seeing how much he was struggling. But she also remembered how he had laughed at her and the other ants when they worked hard during the warm months. "Greg," she began, her voice kind but firm, "we worked all summer to gather food and prepare for winter. Every ant in this anthill worked together, knowing how important it was. If we share our food with you, it could mean we don't have enough to survive." Greg hung his head. "I know, Antonia. I was wrong. I thought I had plenty of time, but I didn't listen. I should have worked hard like you and the other ants. I'm sorry." Antonia saw the regret in Greg's eyes. She thought about his apology and how sincerely sorry he seemed. The other ants had gathered behind her, whispering among themselves about what they should do. One ant spoke up, "Antonia, if we help Greg, will he change? Will he learn to work hard like us?" Greg stepped forward and said, "I will. I promise I'll change. I'll do whatever I can to make up for my mistakes. Please, let me help you in any way I can." Antonia thought carefully. "Greg, you have made a big mistake, but everyone deserves a second chance. If you truly want to help, we will give you tasks to do. You can stay here and work with us, but you must keep your promise to change." Greg's eyes lit up with hope. "Thank you, Antonia. I won't let you down." Antonia nodded and invited Greg inside the warm anthill. The other ants watched curiously as Greg sat near the fire to warm up. They brought him a small meal to regain his strength. "Tomorrow, you will help us reinforce our tunnels and organize the food," Antonia told Greg. "There's plenty of work to do, even in winter." Greg agreed eagerly. I'll do anything you need. I want to show you I've learned my lesson. The next day, Greg woke up early and joined the ants. He worked alongside them, carrying food to storage areas, clearing snow from the entrance, and strengthening the walls of the anthill. Though the tasks were tough, Greg didn't complain. As the days passed, the ants began to see a change in Greg. He was no longer the carefree grasshopper who ignored hard work. Instead, he became a part of their team, helping wherever he could. One evening, after a long day of work, Greg sat with Antonia by the fire. "I've learned so much from you and the other ants," he said. "I understand now that preparing for the future is just as important as enjoying the present." Antonia smiled. "You've worked hard, Greg. I can see that you've truly changed. Remember this lesson when spring comes again." Greg nodded. "I won't forget, Antonia. Next summer, I'll work just as hard as you do. I'll make sure I'm ready for the next winter." The other ants gathered around, offering words of encouragement to Greg. They were happy to see him learning and growing. Through this experience, Greg and the ants learned an important lesson. It's never too late to change and make better choices. Working together, they showed that kindness, effort, and understanding can make a difference. That winter, Greg not only survived, but became a better grasshopper. He learned that hard work and preparation bring security and peace, while teamwork brings friendship and trust. Chapter 6. Working Together. The snow continued to fall outside the anthill, but inside, it was warm and cozy. Greg, the grasshopper, sat near the fire, feeling both relieved and grateful. Antonia, the hardworking ant, handed him a small piece of food. "Thank you, Antonia," Greg said. "I don't deserve your kindness after how I acted." Antonia smiled gently. "Everyone makes mistakes, Greg. What matters is that you learn from them. If you are truly sorry, you can help us when spring comes." Greg nodded eagerly. "I promise I will. I want to make it up to all of you." That evening, the ants and Greg shared a simple meal together. As they ate, the other ants began to ask Greg questions. "Why didn't you gather food during the summer?" one ant asked. Greg sighed. "I thought there was plenty of time. I didn't think about the future." "I was wrong." Another ant smiled. "Well, now you know. We can all work together when spring comes." Greg felt warmth in his heart. He realized that the ants were not only teaching him about preparation, but also showing him the value of teamwork and friendship. Antonia added, "You'll see, Greg, working together can be rewarding. It's not just about survival. It's about helping each other and sharing the load." Greg smiled back. "I want to help. I won't let you down." Over the next few days, as the snow continued to cover the meadow, Antonia and Greg spent time talking about their plans for spring. "We start gathering food as soon as the flowers bloom," Antonia explained. "It's a lot of work, but if everyone helps, it gets done faster." Greg listened carefully. "I'll be there to help. I want to learn from you and the other ants." Antonia nodded. "That's good to hear. But remember, Greg, it's also important to take breaks and enjoy life. We can balance work and play." Greg thought about this. "You're right. I spent too much time playing and not enough time working. But next year, I'll do better." Antonia smiled. "We'll help each other, Greg. That's what friends do." As winter continued, Greg helped the ants with small tasks around the anthill. He cleared snow from the entrance, carried water from melted snow, and kept the fire going. The ants began to trust Greg more, seeing his effort and sincerity. Antonia often encouraged him, saying, "You're doing great, Greg. Keep it up." Greg felt a sense of belonging he had never felt before. He realized that working together made life easier and more meaningful. When spring finally arrived, Greg was ready. He and the ants worked side by side, gathering food and preparing for the seasons ahead. From that day on, Greg and the ants became good friends. They taught each other the importance of balance, working hard when needed and enjoying life together when the work was done. And so, Greg learned that teamwork and preparation were the keys to a happy and secure life. Chapter 7. Springtime Changes. The cold, snowy days of winter were over. The warm sun melted the snow, and the meadow came alive again. Bright flowers bloomed, The trees grew fresh green leaves, and birds chirped happily in the clear blue sky. The ants peeked out of their anthill. They stretched their tiny legs and looked around. "It's time to start working again," said Antonia with a smile. The ants were excited to gather food and rebuild their home after the long winter. Nearby, Greg the grasshopper was also awake. He felt the warmth of the sun on his back and looked at the blooming meadow. "This is my chance to make things right," Greg said to himself. Greg hopped over to the ants. "Good morning, everyone," he called cheerfully. The ants looked at him, surprised but happy. "Good morning, Greg," said Antonia. "Are you ready to work?" Greg nodded. "I'm ready. Tell me what to do, and I'll do my best." The ants showed Greg how to gather seeds and carry them back to the anthill. At first, it was hard for Greg. He was not used to carrying heavy loads, and his legs got tired quickly. But he didn't give up. "You're doing great, Greg," said Antonia. "Just keep going. It will get easier with practice." Greg smiled and kept working. He felt proud as he placed seeds in the storage room of the anthill. The meadow was busy with activity. The ants and Greg worked side by side, gathering seeds, leaves, and other food. They shared jokes and encouraged each other. "Teamwork makes the work easier," Antonia said. Greg nodded in agreement. During breaks, Greg and the ants rested under the shade of a big tree. They laughed and talked about their plans for the future. "Next winter, I won't worry about food," Greg said. "I'll be ready because I'm learning to prepare now." Antonia smiled. "You've come a long way, Greg. We're proud of you." As the days passed, Greg became stronger and more skilled. He learned how to find the best seeds and how to store them safely. The ants noticed Greg's hard work and welcomed him as part of their team. Antonia said, "You've shown us that anyone can change if they try." "We're glad to have you with us, Greg." Greg felt happy and proud. He realized that working together was more fun than being alone. He also learned that a little hard work today could make life easier tomorrow. From that spring onward, Greg and the ants became close friends. They worked hard during the day and sang songs together in the evening. The meadow was not just a place to live, it was now home filled with friendship and teamwork. And Greg knew he would never forget the lesson he had learned.